neglected to tell the emperor exactly how easy it was. Neglected to tell the emperor that, you know, it was everywhere. All you had to do is just go scoop up some river sand and go to work and you could do it. But the fact that we have a golem, and that we know from various writings that the magical Kabbalistic process to make a golem, which is that to hold the charge you put the word Amet, same as the seal of truth, on his forehead, and that brings him to life, that animates him. And then when you want him to go to sleep, you erase the A, and Amet becomes Met, which is death, and the golem goes to sleep. Now, the story is they forgot to erase the A one night, and the golem went on a wild party like a tourist on a spree in Prague, and got very destructive. And that's the origin of the Frankenstein stories. And they had to physically stop the golem, hold him down, and erase the A to get him to go to sleep. But as the guide will tell you, at the old Jewish synagogue and cemetery in Prague, the golem's remains are still in the roof of the synagogue, up under the beam, where he will still be until the next time the Jews of Prague need protecting. So when you overlap all this, it's very easy to see how Prague is sort of the jump-off point for this whole new pattern of alchemical transmutations. So over the next 150 years, we have a large pattern of transmutations, and we can trace the successful alchemist directly back to those people who either studied Kelly's work or originally talked to Kelly directly while he was held in prison. Now, Kelly had no problem with telling people like Oswald Kroll, Michael Meyer, Michael Sendigovius the secret, because they were part of the Brotherhood. Now, that Brotherhood would become the Rosicrucians. And the reason for that ties back to our Shakespeare story. Rudolph II was obsessed with a painting by Albrecht Dürer called The Festival of the Rose Garlands, in which Mary is crowned as Queen of Heaven, and she is distributing rose garlands to Maximilian II, Rudolph's father, and then the Christ child in her lap is giving a rose garland to the Pope. And the significance of this image is that the Holy Roman emperors were crowned by Mary, higher authority, and the popes were just crowned by Jesus. Okay? So they were establishing their primacy in a spiritual sense over the church. Now, the rose garland painting, which arrived in 1588 in Prague, and it was a big deal. It had been carried upright by teams of runners over the Alps, and it was a huge procession through the streets of Prague and up to the capital. And Rudolph had it hung at the very entranceway to his private apartments where he would see visitors. So anyone in 1588, 1586, 1587 who went up to the castle to talk to Rudolph had to pass directly under this huge painting of the Festival of the Rose Garlands. So the students, spies, associates of Dee began to call them the Garland Brothers, or Brothers of the Garland. And as we know, the Rosicrucian documents all contain Dee's hieroglyphic monad, so there's a link between the Brothers of the Garland, Dee's time in Prague, and what in a few years' time would become the Rosicrucians. And the origin point is that picture, the Festival of the Rose Garlands. So Kelly could tell the secret to people who were already in the Brotherhood, already had the high sign, because he could trust them, because they understood the mystical import of the subject. You couldn't trust an emperor who was looking out for his own political interest, but one of your magical brothers who had taken similar oaths to you, you could trust. Okay? Now, perhaps we should talk a little bit about the angelic workings themselves. Dee's great intellectual discovery, which happened in the 1560s, was discovering the idea of the fourth dimension. Now, this was a radical idea. He called it the Holy Grail of mathematics. Now, they didn't have any mathematical way to describe higher dimensions, so it had to be described rather poetically. But in one of the documents that we have that is attributed to Dee, we find a series of seals that, when put together properly, form a cube within a cube. And as you can see, okay. As you can see, that's the basis of a tesseract, or a hypercube. Now, this idea was sort of bubbling around in the back of Dee's mind since the 1560s. And even though he didn't have the mathematics to describe it, he realized very early on that this was the secret to higher orders of information, higher orders of learning and awareness and science. Dee was a very smart man. If you could imagine what it would take, brain power-wise, to even imagine that there's another physical dimension that we can't see, can't understand, and that it contains a right angle to every other right angle in the world, you get an idea of how smart Dee really was. Okay? So to have discovered the idea of a hypercube in a very ancient magical document just sort of blew Dee's mind. It just kicked the doors wide open to all sorts of very entertaining things. So when he began the angelic workings, one of the things he was continually looking for in the angel transmissions was this sort of higher dimensionality, this sort of higher mathematics. Now, the early language works and the Seal of Truth, yes, this has very powerful symmetries, it has very powerful mathematics, but it wasn't until the angels really kicked in Prague that the good stuff started to come. And the very idea of the elemental seals, the elemental tablets, form a hypercube. In other words, the angels transmitted 4 tablets, one for each of the elements, and they are arranged in such a way that if you go off the corner of one, you come back in the opposite corner. If you go off the corner of another one, you come back in the opposite corner. So you're moving from hyperdimensional space to hyperdimensional space. There you go. So this was a very, very powerful idea. And the basic idea was that if you're working with 4-dimension and higher energies, that you have available to you this very powerful but very subtle force that can literally change the shape and the atomic number and the nature of physical elements. So as the angels began to deliver this very amazing piece of science, Dee, even though he couldn't mathematically understand it, understood the value of the information. And as the system grew, as the angels became more intense and more complex, the whole working climaxed in something called the Tablet of Nalvage. Dan? That's fine. That's all we need to show. Can we go back to Tablet of Nalvage? Right there. Now, the Tablet of Nalvage is one of the last of the Enochian tablets or seals to be delivered. And the angels specifically told them that this one contained the secret of alchemy. And of course, Dee didn't understand it mathematically. Kelly didn't understand it mathematically, but being the sort of person Kelly was, he just said, okay, let's give it a go. Let's see what's going to happen. And this was the basis of the science of alchemy. Now, with our more modern perspective, we can actually understand 24-cell 4D figure. It's the very first one. Top. We can actually chart the Tablet of Nalvage and make a very complex 4-dimensional structure called the 24-cell. Now, in 3D, we have 5 platonic solids. In 4D, we have 6. There are analogs of the 5 in 3D, and then there's this figure, which is completely unique. There's nothing like it in 3D. There's nothing like it in 5, 6D, further on up. This is a 4D uniqueness. And what makes this unique